everyone and welcome back. I've been working to finish the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band video for the Beatles Albums Series, but as this past holiday season I've managed to add some new interesting pieces to my collection, I thought I'd start a new parallel series on the best albums ever made. Talking about this subject, we have to acknowledge that there have been so many rankings, tops, charts, lists made over the years, and so many people have chimed in with their opinion on this. It's very difficult to find a definitive top 10, top 20, or top 30 best albums ever made. Thus, without disconsidering all of those charts and lists that have been made over the years, some of them which are actually changing from year to year or every few years, like the Rolling Stone best 500 albums ever made list, it will be more accurate to say that this will be a series in which in each episode I will showcase 10 of the best albums ever made. I didn't want to ignore all those rankings and lists and charts. I even took inspiration from some of them because I did want the albums that I showcase to, kind of align with the overall public feel on them. But at the same time, in some of these episodes, you will see some albums which probably generally do not make any of those top 10, 20, 30, or even 50 lists of best albums ever made. Maybe they do, but like in genre-specific lists. And that is because I think there are albums out there that probably deserve a little bit more recognition than they're actually getting for the significance that they had for the history of music. And actually, there are three main elements, aside from the production of these albums that I will show, the sound, the great quality of the songwriting. There are three elements which I'm also kind of trying to focus on, which is the historical significance of the album, the legacy that it leaves, and the influence that it has on other musicians or other albums after it. For this first episode, I set some rules for myself. They will not apply to future episodes necessarily. One of them is I chose 10 albums from different musicians and bands. I didn't want to have 2 or 3 albums from the same band, although me being such a big Beatles fan, probably I would have fallen into that trap. In the future episodes, though, I will have no such restriction. And also, I wanted to choose albums from different decades, starting from the 50s and ending up with the 2000s. Unfortunately, I couldn't find one album from the 2010s that I would want to include in this very selective list. Maybe in the future episodes, who knows. So we will have the Beatles in this episode, but we will have them with only one album. Also wanted to say that I made this list a while back, and then in the meantime I had changed a couple of the albums, took 2 albums off, added 2 other albums to it, and then I had like a definitive list, very recently I decided to change a little bit even there, and I took one album out of the list for today. The album will be present in one of the future episodes. That album is Queen, Night at the Opera. I do think that this is a more influential album than it's being given credit. It is included in a lot of charts and lists, of course, of best albums ever made, but it's never like in the top 20, 30, or sometimes even 50 albums. And I think that might be wrong. It does have, and it does hold in the history of music, a more significant place than it's being considered for, I think. Okay. So I said that we were going to have albums from different decades. To be honest, 60s, the 70s, a little bit the 80s were kind of the decades where I have the most albums from, but I do have some, like I said, from the 90s, 2000s, and the 50s as well, albeit very late in the 50s. Because we said we want to take this chronologically, we're going to start with Miles Davis' Kind of Blue. This was recorded and released in 1959. At the time, it wasn't such a great success, but it became a huge album later on, and it's the best-selling jazz album, I think, of all time. It is unique through the sound because it was a revolutionary album for jazz at the time, and I think afterwards it kind of influenced a lot of other musical evolution. It includes great musicians aside from Miles Davis, Paul Chambers, James Cobb, John Coltrane and others. it was important also because it is highly improvised. So what is happening on here, although it sounds very cohesive and it's, you know, extraordinary to listen to, it was, a lot of it was improvised on the sessions when it was recorded. For me, I mean, I like jazz, but I wasn't like a jazz fan, so I don't have a lot of jazz records. I do have some CDs. I will get more jazz records as I, you know, increase my collection, but when you have starting to build a collection, especially nowadays with the prices that some of these records have, you have to be choiceful, right? So you have to start with the thing that you are interested in the most. But I am interested in jazz, and the jazz that Miles Davis put forth through this record, Miles Davis and all of the other musicians, of course, was slightly different than what was before. He kind of revolutionized the sound with this. Now, in terms of the pressing, I chose a more recent pressing. This is a 2018 limited edition blue colored vinyl pressing. And you will see this, by the way, for most of the records. So I have records that are recent pressings and some of them that are original or anyway pre-1980s pressings. I chose them based on the sound that was recognized by other people who have bought these pressings. So I tried to find pressings that are widely recognized as sounding very good. Now let's just take a look at the vinyl. It's blue, marble blue vinyl. It looks really nice. And I can confirm, and I will do this for all of the records, right? I will either confirm or not that they sound as advertised. This one indeed sounds very good. So even if it's a very recent pressing, most probably gone through digital remastering, it does sound excellent. The reproduction of the sleeve, I mean, it looks like it would be a sleeve from the late 1950s or early 1960s to me. But I'm not sure because I really don't have anything to compare against, and I didn't really spend time to look at the original sleeves from that period. But it looks like a lot of it was reproduced from the original one, and you do have an essay by Bill Evans on the back as sort of notes. Other than that, not much else to say about the sleeve. It's quite straightforward. You have the blue hype sticker here, as well as, of course, the list of the musicians who contributed to this album. Kind of Blue, Miles Davis, 1959. Now we're moving on to the 1960s, and the first album from the 1960s that we're going to be looking at today is the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. Recorded in 65 and 66, this was obviously, as we said a lot here on this channel, and it's been said on other channels as well, influenced by Rubber Soul, because Brian Wilson had listened to that album and got inspired in creating this masterpiece. Like the Miles Davis album, this wasn't, it was a successful album, but it wasn't such a huge success. It wasn't necessarily a #1 album at the time, but it became a favorite of fans and critics as the decades moved on. So its value started to be recognized more in later years. This went on to inspire generations of musicians from, you know, pushing the Beatles towards recording Sgt. Pepper, but also musicians from the other generations, from the generations after the Beach Boys and the Beatles, like, you know, Elton John and others. So this was extremely influential. It has again become a critical and fan favorite since then. One thing that contributed to that obviously is Brian Wilson's musical genius and the way that the musical arrangements and vocal arrangements are put together on this album with so much attention to detail. It's an amazing listen still today. Now, this pressing is a very recent one. It's 2024. It's an RSD Essential pressing on Coke bottle clear vinyl, which I will show to you. The reproduction of the sleeve is the reproduction of the stereo sleeve from the 1960s, the Capitol one, as you can see. We have the now iconic front cover, and then on the back cover, a collection of pictures and the track listing. No essay, no notes, unfortunately, here. Let's see what we have inside. So this is the original sleeve that thankfully the album came with when I bought it. So it is a polyline sleeve. What I do for the albums that I care a lot about is I tend to put them in these mobile fidelity sleeves now. They are a little bit better with the static, I find. And this is the very beautiful Coke bottle clear vinyl. It has a greenish tint, if at least this is how it seems to me. And this again with the capital rainbow label. This again was said by fans online on different websites that it sounds quite good, and it is true. It's a quite nice sounding album, or nice sounding pressing. It is pressed by GZ in the Czech Republic, and they are kind of, unfortunately, notorious now with the fact that they have kind of bad quality control, and a lot of the things that they press sometimes come out wrong. But this one, thankfully, is quite good. It has some surface noise on side 1, not too much. I haven't yet gone with it through a wet spin clean, so when I will do that, probably that will go away. Otherwise, no defects, no problems, no skips or anything like that. And the pressing sounds quite amazing. So here it is, the Beach Boys Pet Sounds 1966 2024 pressing on Coke bottle clear vinyl. Next up, we finally have the Beatles, and the album that we're going to be looking at today is 1966 Revolver. Now, with the Beatles, these charts and tops and rankings along the years have brought forth usually one or multiple of 4 albums, and those are Revolver, Abbey Road, the White Album, and of course Sgt. Pepper. I think Sgt. Pepper was like the first one to always make these lists and rankings initially, and then Abbey Road came close, and then White Album. I think Revolver was one that popped up more in the past decades or so, and for good reason. I do think that this is maybe their most important album, even though my favorite still will remain Rubber Soul, and I think that's also a very critical album in their evolution. But this one was the one where they really broke through with the new recording techniques and production, and kind of making songs of different genres fit in very well on the same album. So I think it was an incredible achievement, and it is, to me, the most influential. Many people say that Sgt. Pepper is that, but for me, no. I think Revolver is the most influential, because Sgt. Pepper would not have existed had they not gone through this process of recording Revolver, experimenting on it, and doing all of the things here, evolving what they had done on Rubber Soul. So yeah, for me, Revolver is the most important, if you ask me, and it's again one of my top 2 favorite albums from the Beatles, and actually albums ever, probably. With regards to the pressing, my favorite version of this album now is the stereo remix or new mix by Giles Martin, done in 2022. I do have 2 pressings that I can show, though. Of course, I have the mono as well from the box set. This is the stereo from the box set of 2022. What I don't like about the sleeves that were included in that box set is that they feel really, really flimsy. You can see, so I listened to this like a few times, but I haven't played around with the sleeve too much, and you can see it already is not glued properly here. So this is really, really bad for a box set of that price. The pressing is excellent for this and the mono one, thankfully, but still, I mean, making this flimsy of a sleeve in 2022 for a deluxe box set, not good, GZ, not good. Still GZ, say in Czech Republic. This is a pristine looking, if you ask me, stereo version of the album from the 1980s, from the blue box, from the BC13 box set. And you can see, I mean, it looks really, really amazing, right? And it's way better done than these new sleeves that GZ have included in the box set. The disc from the 1980s, more dust and lint than I would have hoped. I didn't manage to clean this properly after the last listen, I think. But anyway, the 2-box silver and black paralel label used in the 80s. Excellent sounding press, this one, but again, all due to Giles Martin for the new mix in 2022. And the pressing from GZ is quite good. So this new one from 2022 sounds amazing as well, at least to my ears. So yeah, Revolver, 1966. We're moving on to probably the busiest decade in terms of the albums on this list, to the 1970s, and we start with 1971's Joni Mitchell, Blue. Now this album was written and produced completely by Joni Mitchell. It is a very personal album, it sounds like it, and it was produced as such. It was very influential, even though this was again another album that wasn't necessarily a #1 album at the time, but has become more influential and more recognized as decades went on, and as a lot of musicians took some inspiration from it. Not necessarily from the style of the music or the genre, because this is folk music, but you have musicians like Elton John, like Taylor Swift, and many, many others that have produced such personal, intimate albums as Joni Mitchell did, or at least certain songs that they produced in that way. And this kind of, makes this album all the more important because its influence on big musicians is felt to this day. I also feel like Amy Winehouse's Back to Black is a similar album, so it was kind of influenced from that perspective because it's very personal, very intimate, and it's a way for the musician to pour their soul out through the music. So yeah, excellent, example of how a musician can use their own personal struggles, feelings, and their personal life, their personal experience, to produce music rather than just having to invent things for the purpose of putting albums out, right? Otherwise, the album sounds really good as well, so it was recorded and potentially produced quite well. The sound is very clean. Of course, it's a very minimalistic album to a certain extent, right? You don't have the big production with huge bands or stuff like that. And it's one of the albums from this list that is being constantly referenced by people and used to test their sound systems because it has such a nice sound to it. The cover, it's quite a plain cover. As you can see, the blue tinted picture of Joni Mitchell on the front, the plain blue back, very little text here on the corners. But it's quite appropriate, right, for this album. Such an introspective, simple yet complex through the feelings that it brings forth album. I guess the sleeve also fits very well with this picture. Now, this pressing is, again, probably obviously to you a more recent pressing. It's another RSD Essential Collection pressing, this one on crystal clear vinyl. You can see on the hype sticker here. Let's take a look at the album as well. This one, by the way, came with a blue inner sleeve, a paper inner sleeve. Unfortunately, this one, as you can see, came with a rip already here. However, I'm not using it too much because as for the other albums, or some of the other albums, I put the disc into a MoFi sleeve, and just to show everything in the end. This one, I haven't taken it out. You can see I have left the outer wrap on it, but it's a gatefold actually. Probably should have unsealed this and show it to you, but I do want to keep the covers as pristine as possible for as long as possible. So where I can, I do leave the wrap on. Let's take a look at the record, because it is another beautiful record. This crystal clear really looks really nice. And I can tell you one interesting thing is when you put this on the turntable, it has a very interesting effect, because if you're looking at it spin, you have moments where you cannot tell which direction it's spinning in. It seems like it's spinning in reverse. This is the effect of how the color of this record is. And you can see we have the, I think, orange label from Reprise Records. And another pressing that I chose because it wasn't expensive, but also it was recent, so more chances of it being pristine and unplayed. As well, it was said by people who had bought it and listened to it that it sounds very good, and I can vouch for that. This one, again, sounds excellent. It is incredible how good Joni Mitchell's voice sounds on this album, even now in 2025. So, yeah, 1971, Joni Mitchell, Blue, 2022 RSD Crystal Clear pressing. The next album is from a band for which I couldn't really decide initially which album to include on this list. They had at least 2 or 3 albums that I thought could make this list today. And I'm like, okay, the other two probably will be in some of the future episodes, and at least one of them for sure will be. Pink Floyd is that band. I was thinking about including one of three options. Wish You Were Here was one of the options. Wasn't the strongest one necessarily for me, but when listening to it or re-listening to it, you realize just how magnificent of an album it is. But then they do have the Dark Side from the Moon and the Wall, Dark Side of the Moon and the Wall, and so when you are putting those two side by side, for me at least, it becomes very difficult to choose. A lot of people, and this is apparent from a lot of these lists and rankings, choose Dark Side of the Moon, and this is the album that we're going to look at today. But I have to say that I still find The Wall to be a slightly stronger album and a more cohesive one. I don't know why. It's probably because it's more of a concept album than Dark Side of the Moon would be, but and it's, you know, it's like a whole story in itself. So I just kind of think that The Wall is a stronger album, but because it has such a wide recognition of one of the best sounding albums and the best albums ever made, the most influential, I chose Dark Side of the Moon for today. This album was recorded between 72 and 73 and released in 1973. It topped the charts at the time, and it stayed in the charts for a record time, I think for 14 years or something like that, something incredible. It was innovative in a lot of senses, and the way this was recorded and produced, and the way that it mixed sounds, and you know, it's such an amazing trip to listen to this album even to this day. And of course, it was super influential for a lot of musicians and a lot of bands. Daft Punk, Radiohead, many others were influenced by it. Some bands were just influenced in producing certain albums, although their style was not necessarily close to Pink Floyd. But at the same time, you know, other bands or musicians' existence in the music sphere is probably due to Pink Floyd and to this album in particular. Now, this is a early pressing. I couldn't find an exact date. It may be, I mean, it was shown on Discogs, I think, as a fifth issue or fifth pressing. I'm not sure about that. It can be from 1973, so it can be one of the pressings from the initial year. It can also be from 1977. Still, it's quite a while ago, so you know, it's been over 50 years probably, or close to 50 years since this was pressed. It's just regular black vinyl this time. Regular black vinyl with the black EMI label. I guess this is silver on black with a blue triangle. As you can see, it looks good, and I can tell you this sounds absolutely excellent. I've added this blue inner sleeve with the poly inner to protect it better than it was protected before. The cover is the classical one, black. Let's see, it's also a fold out. So, and you see that even the cover was preserved really well. You have the lyrics, you have the track listing and some of the recording details here. Yep, excellent pressing. Also, let's see what else we had included on when I got this. One is the original inner sleeve. Paper, of course, I'm not putting the record ever in this again, but it's nice to keep. This one looks a little bit that the time has passed over it. And we also have the poster. Let me just try to open this for you. Oh. I'll try to be careful. So the poster, really well preserved. There we go. Pink Floyd. So yeah, there it is. Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, 1973, probably a pressing from 1973. We're staying in the 70s for the next one. And this one is another band for which I had trouble choosing between different records on which one to include for today's list. And this band is Led Zeppelin. In the end, I was left with two main choices between Led Zeppelin 4 and Physical Graffiti. And the one that won, in my view, is Physical Graffiti. Recorded over a few years and put together from different sessions, it was released in 1975 and I think remains one of the most definitive and influential double albums of all time. And it's said that it's very influential for rock music, but I think it goes beyond, because the sounds, and it's such an eclectic collection of sounds, this album. So for me, I think it kind of steps a little bit over Led Zeppelin 4, just because you can feel in some of these tracks the way that the band is, growing still. And actually, this is true for Led Zeppelin. I think for many of their albums, right? They had such excellent albums even from the beginning, but you see their level of quality growing from album to album, which is quite amazing. For me, it's a similar journey to the Beatles in that sense. And because I spoke about the Beatles and double albums, the Beatles White Album, it's grown on me a lot. It's because it has some songs in there that are my absolute favorites, or in the top favorites for Beatles songs for me. But also, we have to recognize, as a double album, it was patched a little bit, because there were a lot of things put in there that were put in there just for the number, so that they can get the right number of tracks out, so that they can escape their previous contract. So, I mean, I haven't read any of that for Led Zeppelin, but everything that is on this album is good or excellent, at least to my ears. And of course, it produced such iconic sounds. You have Kashmir. It has been a staple of the rock genre for years, and musicians played it again and again. For me, actually, my favorite song of this album is 10 Years Gone. I connect with that song like I do with probably no other Led Zeppelin song. So yeah, it's an amazing album. Also, the presentation of it was, excellent, and it has its uniqueness amongst rock albums of the 70s, and actually of albums of all time. Today, what we have here is actually a UK pressing from 1975. It's one of the first pressings, not the first batch, but from the first series of pressings. And I want to show it to you as well. So the cover, of course, is this cardboard cover with the cutouts of this building. And then you can use different elements that are included in the set to sort of customize a little bit your cover. This is why I find similarities and parallels between this and the White Album of the Beatles. But anyway, this is way more design heavy, right? And you can use this inner sleeve, or one of these inner sleeves, with the track listing. This is like, I would say it's an insert more than a sleeve, right? And you can use this to populate the windows on the cover, but you can also use the printed inner sleeve to do that. So you can do, sort of a very customizable version of the album cover that is unique, so more or less unique for you. Now, the records themselves, I put them again in these blue polyline inner sleeves. I use these for this one because the sleeves, the mobile fidelity sleeve that I was showing earlier, did not fit properly in this. By the way, for this one, I'm going to receive very soon a Japanese pressing, which if you probably know, for Physical Graffiti, there are like 3 versions of pressings that are considered to be amongst the best sounding ones. Not the top, those are very specific, very expensive pressings, but from the ones that people can still afford to a certain extent, you have some US pressings, I think Monarch pressings, you have this UK first presses, and Japanese pressings of this album, which supposedly sound very, very good. And you have the, very unique to Led Zeppelin labels. I'm not going to take both records out, I don't think it's that relevant. But very beautiful design. And worth saying that this sounds really good because of its age, so being one of the first presses, because probably it was played. It didn't look bad, the records look good, but it does have some wear on the grooves. So we'll see with the Japanese pressing how that is. But in terms of a pressing itself, it's really, really good and really, really powerful. So yeah, Led Zeppelin, Physical Graffiti, one of the most influential albums of all time, from one of the most influential bands of all time, like Rush, Aerosmith, and Soundgarden, and countless other bands were directly influenced by Led Zeppelin and by this album. Led Zeppelin, Physical Graffiti, 1975. We're finally moving to the 80s, and because we're moving to the 80s, we could have no other than Michael Jackson's Thriller from 1982. Now, this was recorded across 1981 and 1982. This is as you can see already, a 40th anniversary version from 2022. From a sound perspective, this sounds very good. People were really upset by this cover. But what can we say about this album that hasn't been already said? It is the best-selling album of all time. You have this also on the sticker on the front. I'm not sure if you can actually see it very well. I kept this in the original wrap as well, as you can see. You still have the price tag even from when I bought it a couple of years ago. You have the sticker here on the front, which unfortunately is not sticking very well, as you can see. What else can be said about this album? It's produced by Quincy Jones. It influenced so many musicians. Again, it is the best selling of all time. That should tell you a lot. Michael Jackson by this stage already seemed and looked like a hit-making machine. And you're having Thriller, Beat It, and Billie Jean on this album. For me personally, the fact that it has a collaboration with Paul McCartney was important. Even as a child, I liked that song. It's a little bit corny, so it's no wonder that a child liked it. But yeah, The Girl Is Mine is on this. It's still an excellent album. It still sells today like crazy. And thankfully enough, this 2022 anniversary edition sounds quite good. Now, for the albums that started being produced in the 80s, and I'm not talking just about Michael Jackson, just in general, I'm feeling even less squeamish about getting recent presses, because in the end, digital manipulation started to make its way through the music industry in the 80s. So already you have less analog techniques being used in recording. So then it makes less sense for me to push for fully analog records. So yeah, maybe that's one of the reasons for which, at least for Thriller, but also for the others you've seen, I have no problem getting more recent presses, as long as they are good presses and they sound good, and people haven't, messed around a lot with what the original music was. So yeah, this is Thriller. People were I was talking about the front cover showing that it's a 40th anniversary. The picture is slightly different than the original album, as you can obviously see. A lot of people were upset about this. I wasn't so upset, to be honest. I get it that people want authenticity. Okay, it's a 40th anniversary. I mean, people can play around with it a little bit. They haven't ruined, the album altogether, I think. But anyway, people are entitled to their opinion. The original one is more iconic, obviously. But yeah, I have no problem with this one. Let's take a look at the record as well. But before we do, we have the inner sleeve, the paper inner sleeve printed with the lyrics. Yeah, and a couple of drawings. This one I like because it's one of Michael and Paul McCartney. So it's again very close to my heart for that reason. My God, it's a lot of dust on this one as well. Need to clean this one. So I kept these records, I think this is the problem. I kept these records outside for the past few days because I was preparing for this video, and I guess some lint and dust went in. Original Epic label, pretty classic Thriller album. So yeah, Thriller 1982, the 2022 40th anniversary on vinyl. Obviously an album that cannot, be missing from any collection, and for sure it's not missing from any top albums of all time lists. Still in the 1980s, but at the later part of it, we have our next album, which is 1988's Tracy Chapman self-titled album. This is another album that is on almost every best albums of all time lists. So and I do agree with it. It's a very influential album from many perspectives, and it did reignite the presence of socially charged themes in music near the end of the 80s, and it kind of influenced a lot of artists afterwards. Like with Joni Mitchell's, I feel like this is a very let's say individual focused album without a lot of very complex production. It sounds really raw from that perspective, and Tracy Chapman's voice is allowed to shine through and through. And all of her albums afterwards are actually very good albums as well. And I think the fact that this one was very successful, it topped the charts, it got a bunch of Grammys, it was very important for the music that came afterwards, because it still showed that unique artists with unique voices can get through the clutter of one-hit wonders of the 80s, right? So yeah, it was an excellent album still. It sounds excellent still. Like with Joni Mitchell's Blue and a couple of other albums from these lists that I'm making, it's one where that people sometimes use to calibrate their audio system. So that's how good it sounds. This one is actually a 1988 pressing. So because she recorded this in 1987, released in 88, this is a 1988 pressing. It's a European pressing. I'm not sure of the country. It can be UK or Germany. And I'm saying this because it has this hype sticker on the cover, which is obviously in German, but on the back it has a UK code as well. So, you know, it might very well be something that was released across at that time. But anyway, an excellent sounding pressing, thankfully. Very little surface noise, so it was kept quite well. You cannot escape the surface noise a little bit, because if I'm not able to to clean in depth the grooves, although I get as close as possible with my spin clean machine, and at the same time, you know, it was played at the time, it's very difficult for it to not have a little bit of surface noise, but it's not too much, and some very, you know, silent songs, if you will, it's almost inaudible. So still excellent to hear today. The now iconic cover with Tracy and the black backside of the album with the track list. Again, see, it's very similar to Joni Mitchell in that sense. A sort of semi-blurred out, you know, just sort of bicolor version of the artists on the front, and then a very simple back here as well with the track listing, but very, you know, very delicately written here on the black background. So that's why I think they are similar in that sense, right? They are artist focused, voice focused, not huge production, sort of simple, but at the same time the complexity comes from the lyrics and the vocal value of the artist. It's herself in this case. So yeah, excellent to see that, excellent to hear. Let's see what we have inside of this. Okay, so we have the inner sleeve with the lyrics. This one is nicer for two reasons. It's a printed inner sleeve, again with a picture of Tracy. I love that she's smiling in this. And you have the lyrics on the back, and also it's a paper inner sleeve, but it does have a poly inner, which is something that people should have taken account of and use more, I think. Unfortunately, it has a sort of a cut here, but anyway, I'm not putting the disc inside. I'm just going to keep it the way it is. And again, I've put the disc in this MoFi sleeve, and here it is with the sort of Electra red and black label, the silver writing. I think this is Germany because it has this Electra and Gemma BM logos on here, so I would assume it was Germany, but it was, I think, generally pressed for Europe. Excellent sounding record, excellent sounding pressing of Tracy Chapman debut album, self-titled Tracy Chapman. We're moving on to the 90s, and this is the next to last album, so from by now you will know that there was going to be one album from the 90s and we'll have one from the 2000s. And the one from the 90s was a difficult pick because there were some very influential and special albums, even for me, but just generally for music in the 90s. And we will have more 90s albums in the future episodes. But for today, we chose Nirvana, Nevermind. For the more recent generations, I don't think I have to spell out the effect that Nirvana and Kurt Cobain had over the music scene, alternate rock, and basically launching into the stratosphere, the grunge sound of rock and roll in the beginning of the 90s. This is, you know, it's a very important album, and it was important for the times because of these reasons, and became influential for other bands like Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and others. But it also was important because of the, let's say, the spirit that the band had projected, and the way that, you know, this rebel spirit was coming out of, you know, Kurt Cobain and the guys. So this was really important back then. It was recognized as such, which is one of the albums on the list versus some of the others that were not necessarily successful at the time that they were launched, or they were successful but not to the level that they are recognized to be today. But this one was quite important. Nirvana was at the forefront of the music scene in the early 90s, and up until the death of Kurt Cobain, of course. So yeah, I remember seeing this in my brother's collection on cassette. Didn't know much about it at the time. I couldn't really get on board with the harsher experience of listening to, you know, hard rock records or alternative rock like this, like grunge. It wasn't my jam at the time. I obviously grew into it after a while. But yeah, anyway, it's an excellent album. Obviously, it has, you know, a few big hits on here for Nirvana, and that remain, you know, in the history of music as some of the bigger hits. And the, you know, the fact that they were at the forefront of MTV as well. The videos, at least for Smells Like Teen Spirit, is you know, one of the most recognizable videos of all time. You also have Come As You Are, and a few other very, very good tracks. This pressing is from 2023. It's a pressing made in France. I looked a lot through different pressings in the past few years because this is one of the albums which gets repressed a lot, and there were a lot of pressing. Almost every year you have some variations, and it was difficult for me to find one that I could buy new in Romania that is from a batch that was good, because there are a lot of more recent pressings that are said to be mid, so to speak, but this one was quite good. So it was well regarded online, as much as I could see. So I got it, and then I tested it out. So indeed, it's a very, very nice pressing. It sounds dynamic. It does paint a good picture of what this album really was. Of course, you have the front cover, already iconic, with the baby swimming. This is one of the most iconic images of the 90s, and I think it remained one of the most iconic images of popular music since then. The backside of the record with the track list, the blurry picture of the band. You can see a lot of uniqueness in it, and this kind of rebel or anti-system approach that they had, or at least that they appeared to have for the public, was something that made, I think, Nirvana very appealing at the time. Let's look at the insert as well. I mean, the inner sleeve, again, paper inner sleeve, printed, some lyrics, and you have a picture of the band. And of course, this is a paper inner sleeve, so I will not be keeping the record in it. Instead, again, because of the blue front cover of the album, I chose a blue inner sleeve with a poly inner. Also because my MoFi sleeves, the Mobile Fidelity sleeves that I have, are limited in number, and they are a little bit more expensive. So the records which I can get copies of fairly easier and more or less cheaper, I would keep in just polyline inner sleeves. They are good enough. Here is the record, regular black vinyl, standard, more or less standard label of the David Crafton Company, sounding really, really good. So yeah, Nirvana, Nevermind, one of the albums that is always ranked among the best albums of all time. 1991-2023 pressing. And we're closing today with one album from the 2000s, and definitely my favorite album of the 2000s. I think maybe the best album of the 2000s. I mean, at least if you ask me, with one of the most impressive artists that came out of that decade, and that will definitely leave her mark on music forevermore, is one artist that we unfortunately lost. And of course, I'm talking about Amy Winehouse's Back to Black. Now, this was released in 2006, but the thing is, you know, Amy Winehouse did not put out too many albums. There were two main, sort of Frank and this one, that were like her main big albums that she put out, and they were both excellent. Like, Frank was a very good album, but this one blew everything out of the water, I think, at that time, with so many tracks that are hits. But if you are listening to the album, there are so many other tracks which could have been very well hits as well. And of course, the appeal of Amy was that she was coming with such a fresh voice, but bringing forth a sort of a retro sound of R&B and jazz and blues, bringing those back in the 21st century, which was incredible. And she sounded at the same time, which is a very interesting thing, she sounded at the same time very modern, but also very retro. It was incredible. She had an incredible voice, an incredible musical ability, and the musical sense. And so these tracks, to me, always sounded very good. And obviously, at least 3 of them were like huge hits, like Rehab, Back to Black, I'm No Good. These were like huge hits at the time. Obviously, this album got to #1 in the UK. It topped Billboard charts as well. So, it was a widely recognized album even at the time, and she was a widely recognized musician. Of course, unfortunately, her life, took an increasingly negative turn, or it took increasingly negative path afterwards, unfortunately, but we are still left with this masterpiece of an album. Another point that is important for me is, like Joni Mitchell's and Tracy Chapman's albums before this is a very personal album stemming from her own relationships, suffering, and just her own life. And this is, again, makes it even stronger because you understand that every song has her soul poured into it. And it's just honesty, wearing this on her sleeve. Like those musicians that I mentioned before her, like even John Lennon to a certain extent, right? Another musician, or even George Harrison, musicians that were not afraid to be vulnerable, but at the same time, projecting strength through the music that they were producing. So that's it's quite impressive as well. And of course, aside from that legacy, the legacy was through other musicians, which were clearly influenced and inspired by her, like Sam Smith and Adele and so on. So yeah, again, an excellent album. Now, when it comes to vinyl though, there's a problem with this album, which is it is widely recognized that this is an album which was pressed really badly. So there are quite a few presses, even from the original times when this was put out, and more recent ones, none of which are considered to be good presses. Like there are the press or the mastering is not really that good for this album on vinyl. And people have stated that most issues sound not as good as you would expect from an album recorded in 2006 and from such an important artist, and such awesome songs, to not sound as good as they could on vinyl in 2024 now. But thankfully, there is one version which is said, and I can vouch for that, that sounds appropriate. It sounds good, or very good in some points of it. And this is this deluxe, the double LP version that you see now. This was issued in 2018, and the double LP contains the album on one LP, and you have a bonus album containing a few other tracks, which I'm going to actually go through now, which are Valerie, Cupid, Monkey Man, Some Unholy War, Hey Little Girl, You're Wondering Now, To Know Him is to Love Him, and Love is a Losing Game, the original demo of this song, which is also on the main album. So from that perspective, it's of course a lot of value because you have these additional recordings of songs that she used to play, or she used to sing live even. But then you'll have the original album sounding as good as it ever sounded on vinyl on this. Of course, there is hope that maybe in future pressings they would do even a better job, but I think some of it might come also from how it was initially recorded and mastered. So the vinyl pressings themselves might have not borne all the fault for the fact that this album of vinyl did not sound as good as it could on a lot of pressings. Now, there's not much to say. This front cover is already well known, especially since this is the most recent album of the ones that we've seen today, right? Next year it's going to be 20 years anniversary since it's been launched. You have the back with the track listing for the 2 LPs, as well as you have this, because this is from the Back to Black collection, which includes other albums from other musicians as well, with the half speed mastering at Abbey Road Studios on 180 gram vinyl, all of that stuff. You can see it. All of those albums from that collection have this Obi style strip here with some extra information. And of course, this is again a fold out, so a gatefold. So I kept it again in the initial outer wrap. So let's see what we have. This is the bonus album with a printed inner sleeve. Beautiful pictures of Amy, both on the back and the front. This one I've put in a black polyline inner sleeve. A very nice plain white label for this bonus LP. Okay. Then we have the printed inner sleeve of the main album, of course, with again a variation of the picture from the album front. The back with a series of other pictures of Amy and some details about the recordings and the track listing. And the main album, half speed mastered at Abbey Road Studios. It looks good, plays good, feels heavy, close to 180 grams, I think. I have to say that since I got this during the holidays in the past few months, I've listened to this, or at least to the first side of it, but I think both sides, but the first side a few more times, I think around 30 times. So yeah, I've already kind of used it a lot. It's an excellent sounding album. I have bought some CDs of Amy Winehouse, a collection that you can actually see there behind me probably, just to be able to listen to this album more without actually using the vinyl too much. So there it is, for sure, one of the greatest albums of all time, Amy Winehouse, Back to Black. This was about it for today. I hope you enjoyed this first episode of this series on the best albums ever made. Let me know in the comments if you feel like these 10 albums that I've chosen should not be in this list, or they should be, and what place do you hold for each of them in your own ranking of the best albums ever made. What do you think I should have included in the first episode, and maybe what thoughts you have about what I should include in the future episodes. To be fully frank, I already have kind of some tentative lists prepared for at least the next 2 episodes. So I do have some choices that I've already made, but those can still change. Like I said, about the inclusion of one of the albums today and the exclusion of Queen's A Night at the Opera. That was a last minute decision that I've made. So anyway, we've looked today at albums from 1959 to 2006. In the next episodes, like I said, I will not be so restrictive as to not having the same band twice in the same episode. And so things will get a little bit more mixed up, as well as the fact that I've looked at different decades. I will still have albums from different decades in every episode, but I will not be so strict as to have albums from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. I would be, more focusing on the albums themselves, the ones that I think should be there, rather than focusing on having one or at least one from each decade. And one more thing is that with the future episodes, I might consider at the end of each episode, where we're looking at 10 records, to take one record that probably will not be in any person's list of best albums ever, but I think is great, that I might recommend to you. I already have some thoughts on that. Again, I hope you had a good time. Please leave me your recommendations and your suggestions in the comments. I'm sure to take note of them. Please subscribe if you haven't done yet so, and if you don't mind, it definitely means a lot to me. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope I'll see you next time.